Everything you hear about SeaWorld is negative, but I'm here to ask the question, should we still hate SeaWorld? Part 1, The World Before. Why go back to the beginning? Everybody already knows SeaWorld was cruel. That's what most people think. If you've heard of Blackfish, you probably picture collapsed fins, blood in the water, and a trainer who died. For a lot of people, that 2013 documentary was the whole story. But the cruelty didn't begin in 2013. It began almost 50 years earlier in a narrow inlet called Penn Cove off the coast of Washington. From the beach, it looked peaceful, calm water framed by evergreens, but in 1965, it became the site of one of the most notorious whale captures in history. Here's what happened. Speedboats and planes forced wild orcas into the cove. Explosives were dropped in the water to terrify them. Nets stretched across the mouth so they couldn't escape. The adults circled the calves, vocalizing sounds divers described as screams. But the nets held. Calves were lifted out in slings. Mothers were left behind. Several whales drowned. Their bodies were cut open, filled with rocks, and sunk to hide the deaths. One of those calves was a young female named Shamu. When Shamu arrived at SeaWorld, she was traumatized. But the company didn't just see an animal, it saw a brand. And when the original Shamu died in 1971, the name didn't die with her. It passed on to the next whale and the next. Shamu wasn't an individual, it was a character. By the time SeaWorld Orlando opened in 1973, Shamu was the centerpiece. Families flew in just to see her. Ads ran on TV. Kids begged for plush toys. The show was built as a spectacle, a killer whale raising its tail to salute the national anthem while trainers balanced on its nose. To audiences, it looked like magic, innocence, patriotism, entertainment. But what most people saw in the stadium was an illusion. In the wild, orcas can live 60 to 80 years. In captivity, most didn't reach 25. Their teeth fractured on steel gates. Their dorsal fins collapsed from stress. Mothers were separated from calves. Trainers were injured and sometimes killed. SeaWorld called those accidents. They weren't. They were the inevitable result of confinement. And here's the mirror people forget. Disney was building tanks too. Epcot's Seas Pavilion, Animal Kingdom safari enclosures. Both companies packaged captivity as education and entertainment. The only difference was one ended up as the villain. That distinction matters, and we'll definitely come back to it. But here's the truth. SeaWorld didn't start as a conservation brand. It started as a machine. Cruelty packaged as family fun. And for decades, nobody questioned it. Until one film ripped the curtain open. Part 2, The Fallout Years. So what? It was just a documentary. How could a low-budget film destroy a billion-dollar empire? Because Blackfish didn't feel like a film. It felt like evidence. When it premiered at Sundance in 2013, it was modest. A documentary built around the death of veteran trainer Don Brancheau, killed by a 6-ton orca named Tilikum. But when CNN aired it that fall, millions of people watched it. The footage didn't just show one incident, it exposed the whole system. Violent captures, fractured families, pulled trainers, staged narratives, and corporate spin. For people who'd only ever seen Shamu smiling in ads or splashing kids in the front row, the contrast was devastating. And this was 2013, the dawn of viral accountability. Clips didn't stay in theaters. They spread into people's hands, right into their phone. YouTube, Facebook, Reddit. 30 seconds of a whale thrashing was enough to ignite outrage. SeaWorld scrambled. They bought full-page ads. They launched Ask SeaWorld, a public Q&A campaign that immediately backfired. They pumped out glossy videos of trainers insisting they loved their animals. They called the film manipulative, said it was edited out of context, called it a smear campaign. But the internet wasn't listening. Celebrities canceled their concerts. Hart, Willie Nelson, bare naked ladies. The Simpsons mocked SeaWorld. South Park turned Shamu into a punchline. Pixar rewrote the ending of Finding Dory to avoid looking like captivity propaganda. And Disney quietly distanced itself. Epcot and Animal Kingdom still kept animals on display, but they wanted no association with SeaWorld's stain. The collapse wasn't just cultural, it was financial. Attendance dropped by nearly 2 million between 2013 and 2015. Stock prices fell more than 50%. In Q1 of 2015 alone, the company lost $15 million. By 2014, the CEO stepped down. By 2015, Congress was debating the Orca Welfare and Safety Act. And by 2016, 6 years after Don's death, SeaWorld finally announced the end of orca breeding. They also ended water work with trainers. OSHA had already forced it after Brancheau's death, but now SeaWorld said it out loud. No more humans in the water with orcas, no more rides on dorsal fins. The image of a trainer surfing Shamu's nose was gone for good. But to many people, that wasn't progress. It was a cornered company making the smallest concession it could. But collapse doesn't always mean death. Sometimes it means transformation. Part 3, The Lost Years. After Blackfish, public outrage was set in stone. To the public eye, SeaWorld was cruelty in the form of a theme park. Every rescue looked like PR. Every press release read to us like a cover-up. The narrative that SeaWorld was evil was simple, and it was devastatingly effective. But behind the headlines, the rescue trucks never stopped rolling. While the public debated the morality of the company, that same company's teams were out in the field answering calls no one else could. Manatees sliced by propellers, sea turtles tangled in fishing line, dolphins beached and gasping. This wasn't staged for guests, it happened in back-of-house hospitals the public never saw. These facilities were equipped with massive rehabilitation pools, specialized veterinary staff, and round-the-clock emergency response teams, an infrastructure that few other organizations could match. This created a deep contradiction. On one side, you had whales circling concrete tanks, a brutal and undeniable image of confinement. On the other, you had exhausted technicians stitching up animals that would have died without SeaWorld's help. That scale matters. By the mid-2010s, SeaWorld had already logged tens of thousands of rescues, with numbers verified by government agencies like National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, otherwise known as the NOAA, and the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. Compare that to Disney's efforts. While Epcot's Seas Pavilion has treated a few dozen manatees, SeaWorld has rescued more than 1,000. Disney rehabs turtles in small numbers, SeaWorld does it at an industrial scale. So if you've ever applauded Disney for conservation, you've already cheered for the same work SeaWorld's been doing, just at a magnitude Disney could never match. This doesn't erase the tanks or the collapsed fins, but it proves the story was never as simple as all bad. The company's identity was fractured, divided by its painful legacy and its critical, if often unseen, conservation work. This split kept the company staggering forward, not collapsed, not redeemed, but in a state of division that couldn't last forever. Part 4, The Pivot Years. By 2016, the limbo couldn't last. The shows were hollow, the stadiums half empty, the brand was still radioactive. So SeaWorld made the biggest announcement in its history. No more orca breeding. The whales in the tanks would be the last generation. The theatrical shows that had defined the company for 50 years would be phased out. On paper, this looked like a turning point. The very thing critics had demanded for decades was now official policy. But that didn't land as redemption. It landed as admission. They only stopped because they were forced. Too little, too late. You don't get a medal for quitting cruelty after 50 years. And honestly, those reactions made sense. SeaWorld's credibility was gone. You can't spend decades calling the shows education, then suddenly end them without looking guilty. So the conversation shifted. If the shows were ending, why not release the whales? Why not build sanctuaries and give them freedom? Here's the reality. Orcas aren't manatees. Many have lived in tanks for generations. They've never hunted, never lived in pods in the wild. Sanctuaries sound noble, but the infrastructure just doesn't exist at that scale. The harsh truth is, the whales would live out their lives in the tanks. Inside the company, strategy pivoted fast. If Shamu couldn't sell tickets, Steel might. Orlando got Mako in 2016, the tallest, fastest coaster in the city. San Diego leaned into electric eel. Critics called it camouflage. They'll distract you with roller coasters, but nothing has changed. But the rescue work didn't stop. In fact, it scaled up. The Orlando Manatee Hospital expanded. Sea turtle rehab deepened, and behind the scenes, Disney made a call of its own, stepping into partnership with SeaWorld on coral restoration. Think about that. The same Disney that owns Pixar, that rewrote Finding Dory to avoid looking like captivity propaganda, was now working shoulder to shoulder with SeaWorld scientists. Quietly, not for PR, for reefs. So the pivot wasn't clean redemption. It was contradiction in motion. A company cornered, switching to coasters, still housing whales, but also building out rescue capacity and earning Disney's trust on science. Part 5, the Reinvention years. After the breeding ban, SeaWorld knew the orca shows couldn't carry them anymore, so they doubled down on something safer and, to me, more fun, thrill rides. Orlando followed Mako with Infinity Falls and Icebreaker. San Diego rolled out Electric Eel and Emperor. Steel sells. It doesn't get boycotted. It doesn't show up in Netflix exposés. But here's what most people missed: scale. By the late 2010s, SeaWorld had already documented more than 35,000 rescues. Those numbers weren't spin. They were logged with NOAA, the U.S. Coast Guard, and Florida Fish and Wildlife, the agencies that call SeaWorld when no one else has the facilities. That scope also pulled in new scrutiny. Accreditation from the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, research partnerships with universities, and collaborations with NGOs. For a company once infamous for secrecy, opening the doors to regulators and scientists was a pivot as sharp as any coaster's drop. And then came the collaboration that mattered most. Disney, the same company that once distanced itself after Blackfish, stepped into partnership with SeaWorld. Together they built the Coral Rescue Center, the largest land-based coral nursery in the country, regrowing Florida's reefs devastated by disease. Disney doesn't risk its brand lightly. That collaboration wasn't cosmetic. It was proof the science held up. And that shift from spectacle to infrastructure is exactly why the orca question lands even harder now. Part 6, the orca question. For a lot of critics, nothing else matters. The orcas are still in tanks. Until they're free, nothing has changed. And it's not wrong to raise that. Tanks aren't oceans. In the wild, orcas can swim up to 100 miles a day. They live in complex pods with vocal traditions passed down through generations. Concrete walls can't replicate that. So why not release them? Why not build seaside sanctuaries and let them live out their lives in natural water? It's a fair question. Here's the harder answer. As I said before, orcas aren't manatees. They can't be rehabbed and dropped back in the wild. They've never hunted, never lived without human care. They don't know how to survive. The situation isn't a simple chant. It's a trap with no easy exit. While noble sounding, the sanctuary solution is still a theory. The infrastructure for dozens of whales barely exists, and scaling it is a problem no one has yet solved. And that's why 2016 was so important. The breeding ban locked this generation in as the last. No more calves, no wild captures, no artificial insemination. The whales alive now will live out their lives in tanks, but no new ones will follow. Critics fire back. SeaWorld only stopped because they were forced. And that's true. They didn't wake up with a moral awakening. They stopped because pressure and collapsing attendance left them no choice. But the outcome stands. There will never again be a new orca born at SeaWorld. So where does that leave the debate? With an image that doesn't go away. Visitors still walk past tanks. Fins are still collapsed. The visual is still brutal, and that's why for many people, the story will never move past 2013. But while the orcas age out, the rest of SeaWorld's animal programs have expanded. More than 40,000 animals rescued to date. That doesn't cancel the tanks, it sets up the moral split. Because if whales can't leave and SeaWorld can't erase the image, then the question becomes, what do you do with a company that's both the site of that pain and the backbone of marine rescue in the US? That's the line we have to walk into. Part 7, the Disney Mirror. One of the comments I hear the most is simple. If you're vegan, how can you go to SeaWorld? Buying a ticket means you're paying for cruelty. And I understand that question more than you know. The argument sounds airtight until you hold it up to a mirror. Because if captivity itself is the line you can't cross, what exactly are we doing every time we line up for Kilimanjaro safaris at Animal Kingdom? What are we doing when we walk into Epcot's Seas Pavilion, where dolphins and manatees live in tanks right now? Why do we treat Disney as conservation and SeaWorld as cruelty, when in practice both companies are keeping animals on display? This isn't about dunking on Disney, it's about consistency. If captivity is the red line, then we should stop visiting every theme park that keeps animals. But most people don't. They defend Disney while condemning SeaWorld. And that tells you something. It means outrage isn't just about animals, it's about the story people want to believe. Blackfish froze SeaWorld as the villain. Disney still sells itself as magic. The same tanks that look like prisons at SeaWorld look like conservation in Disney World. And the fact that Disney and SeaWorld now share conservation projects makes it even more complicated. Some critics argue this was just greenwashing, a way for Disney to lend legitimacy to a controversial topic. But the people on the front line see it differently. The same Epcot cast members who care for animals in the seas told me straight up, go see what they're doing at SeaWorld now. That mattered to me a lot. It was the turning point, actually. It's what made me go to SeaWorld and buy a ticket and look around, because they're not activists. They're not spokespeople. They're the ones in the water every day, and they said the work was real. So here's my reality as a vegan. Sorry to say it so many times, but it's important for this video. I don't pretend the orcas are thriving in the tanks, but I also don't pretend Disney's animal exhibits are fundamentally different. If I'm going to film at Animal Kingdom, and I do all the time, then I can't condemn SeaWorld for the same practice without lying to you, and lying to myself, most importantly. That's not hypocrisy, that's honesty. Both companies hold animals in captivity, and both now fund rescue and research that make a measurable difference for species in the wild. The mirror doesn't lie, and once you look into it, the outrage can't stay frozen in 2013. Part 8, the story that stuck. Say the word SeaWorld online and watch what happens. Comment sections don't ask what's changed, they reload the same images from 2013. The collapsed fins, the bloody pools, and Dawn's death. Facts slide off. Anything that happens after that slides away. Numbers bounce. You could show 40,000 rescues on a spreadsheet and still get the same reply. But the whales are in tanks. That's not debate, that's memory on repeat. And I understand it. Those images are seared into culture. Blackfish wasn't just a documentary, it was a revelation. Once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. But that's the trap. It means every new fact, every reform, every rescue gets weighed against the picture that froze a decade ago. More than a decade ago. You can see the double standard in real time. Scroll one post and you'll see Disney's dolphins at Epcot framed as conservation. Scroll the next and you'll see SeaWorld's dolphins framed as cruelty. Same species, similar tanks, completely different story. So this isn't about telling you to forget 2013. It's about holding two things at once. The SeaWorld that earned its villain status and the SeaWorld that rebuilt parts of itself after. If you only carry the first picture, you miss the work that matters today. And if you carry the second, you erase the pain that got us here. Both are real, both live in the same place, and the hard part is deciding what to do with that contradiction. Part 9, the move that matters. So, should you hate SeaWorld? That's the question we've been circling for the last 20 minutes, and the truth is, it doesn't have a simple yes or no. Here's what's real. SeaWorld earned its villain status. Blackfish wasn't propaganda, it was proof. The captures, the collapsed fins, the deaths, the history happened. You don't forgive that with a marketing campaign. But here's what's also real. The whales in the tanks today are the last generation. The breeding stopped. The circus stunts ended. And while tanks stayed brutal, the same company became the backbone of marine rescue in the United States. More than 40,000 animals saved. The largest coral nursery in the country. Disney scientists now working in their labs. Both of those truths exist at once. So the move isn't to erase one or cling only to the other. The move is to hold them both and decide what accountability looks like now. If you want to keep hating SeaWorld, you can. No one is stopping you. But if you want to hold them to their present reality, then aim your outrage forward. Demand receipts, quarterly intake reports, rehab to release ratios, sanctuary research. Don't let them slide back into spectacle. Force them to keep scaling the rescue work. Here's the thing. When you buy a SeaWorld ticket in 2025, you're not paying for Shamu's nose ride anymore. You're paying for a formula in a rescued manatee's bottle, sutures in a turtle's flipper, fuel in a van that will haul a dolphin off a beach at 3 a.m. It's not an absolution, it's allocation. And it leaves the question in your hands. Not should you hate SeaWorld, but do you want to fund the ghost of what it was? Or the work it's finally doing now? That's the choice, and you get to make it. If you made it to the end, go ahead and put this password in the comments below. And while you're down there, why not hit like and subscribe, and go ahead and turn on notifications so you'll be the first to know when myself or one of my friends puts out a new video, something we do all week. Why? Because we're serious about fun. See you next time.